that? Oh God, I'm gonna die. I gotta get this on camera. No. Hey everybody, welcome to the Marino Show. I'm your host, David Marino, and today I'm welcoming back a guest, John Isberg. He's been on a few times. He's a writer, director, filmmaker, and today we're going to talk about some of his latest projects, talk about some of his other projects, and just everything, movie, film, whatever you want to talk about. So John, thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun to run into you at AFM also, NAB, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, we ran into each other in Las Vegas at the NAB conference, and we actually got to meet in person. So that was really cool. I was real excited about that.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was a fun time. I've seen some of what you've been up to, and I know that you have a new project on the horizon called Big Muddy, right?
Yeah.
And want to talk about that. In our last interview, in case y'all don't know, a film that John made, it was called Final Summer. And way back when it came out, we talked about that film. And there were plans to make a sequel. However, some things have changed. And I'm going to let John sort of explain Big Muddy and how the Final Summer stuff led to this. So tell me about this process and Big Muddy and what it's about and all of that.
Sure. Yeah, I think the interesting thing with making a first film is that, I had no idea about anything about the process. I'm learning as I go. And I think it becomes it is all consuming, and you start to feel like you're on this constant treadmill of moving it forward. And I think at a certain point, it's like your feet are still on the treadmill, but the treadmill's not going anywhere. And like, you're not going anywhere. And I was starting to think about the next project, and I felt like, it seemed like we had a lot of success with Final Summer, just in terms of getting out there, in terms of like meeting lots of people and people watching the movie. And, I always had thought of it as a 3-part movie, kind of about the stages of trauma. The first one's fight or flight. The next one is kind of that stage of kind of the real kind of darkness of PTSD, and then kind of coming out of that kind of insane situation. And it was really interesting because then it's like you're writing a sequel, right? And so it was fascinating to see how difficult writing a sequel is and how quickly it can go off the rails. And I started to understand why. I start to see now, okay, I see why sequels are very difficult sometimes, because I feel like a lot of films, like, you might not ever even think that far ahead in advance in terms of the story, where it sets up, or for example, like where you leave things at the end of just a production of a film, and like in terms of like working with actors or crew or people you like, or people that are, like they might find you difficult or you find them difficult, things like that. And so it was really interesting just to think of the complexity of it. And over time, I was really starting to think about what makes a good film good. And I think a lot of it was like, it's much simple. Like the idea is much more simple than I think. And so I feel like that's where sequels go crazy. And so, yeah, I wrote the sequel, I think at least 2.5 times. I wrote 2.5, I got through like 50 pages of the first draft, and I threw that away because I was like, this is nuts. And then I went into and then I rewrote another draft that was like 110 pages. And I'm like, I like this. And then I realized this is crazy, because I think it's like where you leave characters, it's like you have to kind of go from that direction to set up the next film sometimes. And it's like, well, who? And then you think, and the big thing I've been thinking about is the audience, like kind of like watching the film with an audience and experiencing the film with an audience. You start to see how things play what they like, what they get confused by, what they didn't like. And so that was really helpful and made me think more about the writing. So then I went back another time, wrote the script again, and I just felt like I was writing the same film. And I don't know. So then I wrote another film about like more of a paranormal supernatural film. And then it just, I don't know how I got into Big Muddy. It was just kind of random, I think. I don't know, but but I was also trying to think about because like I was just talking with my friend the other day about how the things that reveal themselves to you when you're making your first film, right? I had always thought, oh, Final Summer, it's a one location film because we're at a camp. That's one location, but within that one location, there are like 85 locations that were moving all our gear, and it was exhausting and beat us up a lot. And so I was trying to think, well, I'm questioning like throughout this process I'm questioning the sustainability of indie filmmaking. Like, is this sustainable? Is it really worth like spending, like, we didn't, our budget wasn't this, but I've worked on other films where like their budgets were like 300 grand or something, to turn that around and maybe make like a couple grand off of streaming, like, is that, I don't really see how that's sustainable. And so I started thinking smaller and smaller, which is funny to end up with a movie called Big Muddy. But but then I kind of finally hit on an idea, um, and I kind of go back to the '80s with films I love, like Tremors and The Burbs and The Goonies and Gremlins, and I love like Joe Dante kind of films and like Richard Donner. Those kind of like '80s creature features where the characters, where you really like the characters a lot, and it's just kind of this crazy situation. Or like Tremors was a big influence too, and then Jurassic Park and other films like that. And so that's kind of where it led me to Big Muddy, because I was like, well, let's just do a creature feature film. That seems really fun, and have it take place where it's like kind of like those ensemble films where you have people who should never really be together end up together, and it just creates this crazy situation. Like, I feel like, take the Goonies for example. You've got the core group, and then there's like the older brother, and then there's like the two girls, but then you got the Fratellis, and there's all these people that come together, and there's kind of a magic that happens when they all come together. And and I think that's the thing, is like when you're producing, when you're kind of like pushing these different projects forward, I think one thing I've learned is to have a couple irons in the fire. So a couple film ideas going. I probably had like 5 or 6 at one point, and I think it's kind of one of those things where sometimes like this project you'll get a lot of motivation from this one project, and then you might hit a wall at one point. You're like, all right, well, let's table that for now, and I'm going to go back here and just move this one forward a little bit, because maybe something like an idea opened up here and that sparked something. And no, it's and I think I wrote 2.5 drafts of Final Summer 2, another draft of this movie called Voices Carry, which is about the supernatural film, and then I wrote Big Muddy. And to go to Final Summer, I think there's a couple scenes in that film that are really, it made me think, and I think about this a lot when I watch other first films of directors who go on to other things. It's like, in that film there's something that's very them, and I realized like that the things that I was probably most drawn to in Final Summer that the audience really loved the most were like the fun bits that we were like, oh, we got to do this thing because it's fun. Like like the pool noodle sequence, or like a lot of the stuff with Mario, like with the bat where he swings and misses. And I'm like, that's some of the most fun I had on Final Summer. It's like, let's take those kind of nuggets of inspiration, let's put them into this whole movie. And then I just sat down for like 2 weeks, and I wrote, like, to me it's like the funniest, kind of craziest movie. And I was just laughing as I was writing it, and I'll read it. I'll just sit down and I'll read it like through a reading. And I'm like, oh, this you could breeze through it. And I think, again, like the big thing I kind of saw was that the best script should be the one that wins, and that's the one that you move into production on. And I kept going back to this one throughout, and every time I sent it to actors, they're like, oh, dude, this is hilarious. I love this, da da da. Like, I want to be in this thing. And then one day I was sitting at the Virginia Theater in Champaign. It's like a really beautiful theater. And I was like visualizing the 3 different ideas on the screen as I was just waiting for the movie to start. And I was like, yeah, Final Summer, okay. Because we did do like some camera tests, some kind of steady cam stuff with it. And it was really cool looking. I was really excited about it. I was like, yeah, it's kind of the same movie. I don't know if I want to make the same movie right now. I want to, and then I got to Big Muddy, and I was like, oh, I could see this, and I want to see it. You know, it's like you want to see the thing, and so I think that's where it was. And I started writing to some of the actors from Final Summer that I wanted to work with again, and then some actors that I had met on other films, and I just kind of wrote to them. And to go to the writing part of it, I think what I also realized from Final Summer, that we might talk about last time, is is you're making a movie, and so it's okay to have it be larger than life. It's okay to have characters say cool things or crazy things, or have like one-liners that are awesome, or you know, like just funny moments. And I think that's because I think the audience, especially, I worked on a film called Haunted House of Pancakes. It was it was an intense shoot, but I love the script and the characters were so much fun. And I was like, this is what I want to. I want to make a film like this, you know, with my kind of, you know, creative control and stuff over it or whatever too. And so it was, you know, and so I think that's where like this really kind of came to be. And so, but it is based on a true story of the Murfreesboro Mud Monster incident in 1973 in Murfreesboro, Illinois. So I was like, all right, we got, you know, there's kind of there's a cryptid audience there, there's a horror audience there, there's a comedy audience there. It's all crazy but really fun. So that's the long approach to Big Money, I guess I would say.
So where are you right now in the process? The early stages. Are you going to do anything like an IndieGoGo campaign, or what is the next step?
Yeah, we'll do an Indiegogo. It's going to launch July 3rd. We're actually going to kind of do a big kickoff thing at the Big Muddy Monster Festival in Murfreesboro, Illinois, on the 21st of this month. And then I'm planning to shoot it starting late August, so kind of August, September. And we've already started to, like, we just went to the camp about a week ago to do lighting tests for it. And because, you know, like, we're kind of using different cameras this time, like Sony FX6, FX3. And what's kind of nice about it is that there's been some really great advances in camera technology and sensor technology. And I've even seen this in movies like The Creator. They used the FX3 in that one, and we're shooting anamorphic because it, you know, allows you to shoot at like that 12,800 ISO, so you don't need as much lighting. And I think when I started Final Summer, one thing was, and that crew needed a lot of, or that film needed a lot of crew because it was big scale, but a lot of people tell you things like you need a lot of people, and sometimes I'm like, you just need a good crew of people. And I think like these cameras and the approach that we're taking to this one allows us to make what feels like a big film, but on a smaller scale. And so, like, to go to like the FX6 and all that. So we've been doing a lot of kind of like nighttime tests just to see kind of what's a baseline for our lighting, what we can get away with. And it was crazy. We were lighting this huge area. We had tons of like these aperture lights, all at like maybe 1 to 2 to 10% power. And we were lighting everything. And I'm like, well, this looks cool. And it was so crazy because that's where we are now. And so I think it's, to the indie film side of things, it's freeing to think that, you know, before I was shooting like 800 ISO out in the field at night and pumping as much light as we could into it. Now it's like I'm like 12,000 over that. And so now it's like we're actually trying to find ways to not blow the image out and stuff. So it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, so I think we just been doing it a lot. And then I've been taking this Stan Winston online creature suit course, and I've been like building the suit for it, you know, because that's, you know, you making a, you know, like I grew up on like Harry and the Hendersons and stuff like that, and you know, and so you need that kind of a suit. And then the actor who plays Big Muddy, he's like 6'8", and he's really great too. So I really like working with. So I feel like it's. I think the one thing about Final Summer was it was a very stressful shoot. I had to turn down like that $50,000 from those con artist guys, and it was my first time, and there's so many things I didn't know. And I feel like now I feel a little bit more confident, but also what I'm looking for is people I really enjoy working with, because I want everybody to feel supported. I feel like I've learned so much more about blocking and working with actors and all that kind of stuff. So just trying to build a positive, supportive environment for actors and crew to feel supported and me not be like losing my mind and kicking apple boxes over the place, swearing up the storm. Sounded like a drill sergeant I had one time. So, I mean, it's how it is. Working in production, it's always crazy. But I've had some really good examples of like leaders that I've seen, and I want to emulate that style a little bit more. So yeah.
When are you hoping? You said you're going to be shooting at the end of the summer. Will it be out next year sometime in 2026 or?
Yeah. So we're planning on next year, and going through the film festival route. I think it's interesting because I feel like it was so tough to decide on, because I felt like the things that were leading me to do part two for final summer, and I finally got a script that I like, and I feel like the direction is right for it, but I feel like it needs work. And I felt like if I would have gone into do a final summer two, it probably would have like put me in a box, of like he's the final summer guy. And I feel like there's a lot of films that there's other stories I want to tell, and like I might want to do a drama sometime or something, it just so it just felt like to me it's like a chance to do something different and just kind of open yourself up to more ideas and more tastes and more, because I feel like that's only going to help if we come back to like a part two. It's only going to make that one better, I think, versus like if I'm just looking at the same story again. So, and this, I like this. I feel like we finally got to a good place with the story, and it's really cool and super bloody to satisfy all the slasher fans. But like, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted to do something else for a bit. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, now isn't the time for that. The time is, for like you said, Big Muddy. That's what you're feeling right now. So that's good. Speaking of, you said working in production, and I know that you're versatile in terms of everything that you do in the filmmaking world. You were involved in a recent documentary that's airing on Netflix now called The Twister, Caught in the Storm, which is about the Joplin tornado that I think it was 12 years ago now, 10 years ago. Yeah. I am fascinated by tornado documentaries. I love watching tornado footage. I've just always been fascinated with weather kind of disasters. And so I watched that documentary, and it was put together so well, and it was kind of told a little differently than you usually see with documentaries. Just all I can say is people should watch it. But you did have like a small part in this, right? Like, tell me what you did as part of this film on the crew.
Sure. Yeah. I was kind of like in grip and electric on that one, and that was fun because kind of the core team came from LA out to where we are, and the nice thing about this is that also it's tied into some friends of mine who have been developing these sound stages, these film studios out of a former Air Force base, just 20 minutes from me, called Flyover Film Studios. And again, I think the interesting thing about kind of a post-COVID, film industry is that, and with streaming, I think that it has opened up the possibilities for filming to be not just in LA or Atlanta, but a lot of different places. And then Illinois has got a really good film tax credit incentive of 30%, and that starts at $100,000. And so, yeah, if you have a $100,000 production budget, you come to Illinois, you shoot there, you get a $30,000 tax credit that goes to your budget. So there's a lot of just good ideas for shooting here. And so kind of like the core LA team, the director, I think it's like Alexandra Lacey. She was really cool, and then the DP was from there too. But the core team came, and then we supported the shoot, and that's part of, again, like what my friends Robin Stern and Sarah Sharp are doing, is that they're building they're doing a lot of like these workforce trainings for people who are interested in going to film production here. And then through that, then they're able to work on these other shoots. And we had, there's another Netflix documentary that came through earlier called Rising Phoenix. I worked on that one with like a British crew. But to go to Twisters, yeah, it was it was cool. Like, we used a 360 car rig for some of the scenes where they're like in the car and they're moving around. So if you see some behind the scenes footage, you'll see like that's a rig that they have at the hangars there at the former Air Force Base. And it's just kind of cool. I think it's really cool to be able to work with LA crews who are, very professional, very kind of at the top of their game. And so to be able to kind of hold your own a bit with them is, it's motivating and makes you encouraged to feel like you're on the right path, and that and that you can hold your own, with like LA crews and stuff. But no, it was really cool. I logged like 37,000 steps that day. I was just walking back and forth from like the grip truck to set all day long, But and I'm getting older, so like grip is kind of hard. So that's why sometimes I prefer camera or directing, because carrying C stands and like just getting those lights like way the heck up there is exhausting. But it's fun, to be a part of, and yeah, I think it was a really cool story. I've been in some like tornadoes before too. Like I was in kind of like before it really hit. There was a tornado that hit in Plainfield, Illinois, like back in the '90s, and I was like, our bus was getting like buffeted by all this corn flying, hitting it and stuff like that. But it really hit Plainfield. But then in Champaign, one year I was driving home from Champaign, and yeah, like I pulled over, I was going off the expressway, and there's a tornado coming right toward us, and like those huge like roadside, like those orange barrels. Like I'm pulling off to the off ramp, and it's like there's tons of that construction, and these barrels are just blowing across the road. And so I pull over because I see all these other people pulled over, and this guy runs up and he bangs on my window, and he's just like, "Tornado's coming! Get the hell out of here!" Which is not something that is a calming influence at the moment. So it's like I was like running like crazy, and of course, where do we run? Underneath like the overpass, bridge. But they're always like, "Don't go there," but that's where we went. so so it was crazy. But yeah, no, but yeah, thanks for checking it out. I think it's cool, because we are so far from the film industry, like from the LA film industry, to be involved in something like that makes you feel like you can, like, it's like the dream is tangible, because I think for a lot of us it's like so out there in terms of like the odds of working on a Netflix production or whatever if you're not in LA, if you're not in Atlanta. So it was exciting to be a part of, so
Well, it was very good. I encourage everybody to check it out. The filming, all of it, the story itself, it was done. Obviously, they interviewed people who were involved in that tornado, but yeah, I thought that it was really well done. So, going to be working on Big Muddy. You were saying earlier that there's a lot of different types of films that you want to work on. So you've done slasher. Now you're going to do a creature feature.
Yeah.
What would be kind of your next goal if you were going to make a certain type of film? Because it sounds to me like you kind of want to expand, not just be stuck in a genre,
Right.
but to do everything, which any director would hopefully want to do that.
Well, I think it's interesting because like the one thing I love about horror, and I think this just goes to like the bigger question of the sustainability of filmmaking, especially independent filmmaking, especially like if you don't have like like the quote unquote rich uncle, which I is how do you do this sustainably where you don't kill yourself in the process? Because like I out of pocket made up the difference of that $50K that I had to turn down on Final Summer. So like when I turned them down, and then we did all that, we did the film, the next 3 years, I was working side gigs to pay everybody on the crew and pay all the cast back, and I finally did. And it's funny because one of the guys sent me like a package, and I knew it was like a signed copy of the script from like the cast. And I was like, I'm not going to open that until I finish paying off the film. So it's going to be like my like Tom Hanks like Castaway, like his like FedEx package. And so instead of like the angel wings, I drew like two like bloody axes on like the cover of it. but I think it's just the sustainability of it is so tough. So I think it's like you just have to find the ideas that are possible to make. And that's where I think horror is so great, because the horror community is so supportive of film. it's. I always find it ironic, and I got yelled at by this like Friday the 13th guy recently, because like they shared like the new like Jason thing, and everybody was like going off like, oh, this is so stupid, and I just made some comment just to be funny about like slasher fans are so funny because like if you give them what they want, they'll say you didn't do anything new, and if you give them something new, they'll say that they didn't give you what you want, so you can't win. So I just thought it was funny, but anyway, I was gonna say, but they're very supportive, and so that's something I feel like it's hard to ignore when the odds of a film succeeding are so slim, you know. And so I think as a horror, like at least you have a chance, I think, with a horror film. And I do love horror. I mean, oh man, like you should see my my DVD collection, my Blu-ray collection has expanded. It's like 50% schlocky 80s horror, which I love, you know. And but you know, no, I think there's definitely other films. That's where I feel like with Big Muddy, it kind of straddles that line between horror and comedy. And there are films that are like horror comedy, but I feel like are more like they're comedies that are like in the horror like packaging, but they're not really horror films. Like they don't like lean into the suspense and the tension building. And I feel like that's stuff I want to do with Big Muddy, where it's like, and I feel like a lot of the humor comes from the situation where you're kind of like, you're like, ah, oh, like you're on the edge of your seat, like, but it's so funny because it's so ludicrous. And but the characters are always dead serious about what they're doing, which I think is, to me, it's like some of the best horror comedies, which is where I bring up like Tremors, where I feel like they're always serious. Like they're seriously those guys. Like it's never like tongue in cheek. Like you always feel like they're serious, like Kevin Bacon's serious. And so, but no, I've got a couple projects. And you know, to go to the horror things, a couple are horror, and it's like I think the thing I've learned is like the simplest idea allows you to make the best film. So I've kind of thought more about like, can I have like less characters? Can I have 3 characters in a film? And then to go to like locations, because sometimes like I was looking forever for like a great looking haunted house that wasn't my house, because my house would have been perfect, but then that'd be like relocating my 2 dogs and my wife and my kids, and they'd be mad. so, so I'm like, all right, so much for that, you know. Um, so I think it's just there's always these little hangups, and that's why I think it's good to have multiple ideas going forward. But I've got one that's like that I love, that I feel like this could be like a good kind of stepping stone to the next one. And I think this one, like, I don't know, I think a big inspiration for me is like if I look at James Gunn's film Slither, I feel like Big Muddy has a lot of that DNA of Slither to it a little bit, just in terms of characters and the stakes and all that stuff.